When Jane asked me to speak here today, I readily said yes because I assumed she wanted me to talk about the lighthouse. It is Mission Sunday here after all, and if you know me, you know that I can and do go on and on and on about the lighthouse with ease. When Jane then asked me to lunch to discuss the readings I would choose and shared that no, she didn't want me to talk about the lighthouse at all. She wanted me to preach, yes, preach about my own faith journey. I must confess, when it looked like Joaquin was headed for landfall up the bay, I had a brief moment of thinking, if the hurricane hits, surely St. Margaret's will call off church. And God will save me yet again. Trust I know how selfish and long those fleeting hopes were. So Jane, thank you, I think, for inviting me. But really thanking you for pushing me into new ground, reflecting solely on God's presence continuing throughout my lifetime. What I realized is my faith has been unwavering my entire life. But it is living into that faith that is the journey. The practice of faith, the choices and actions we make, that I have made, that lead from desert to mountaintop, from looking for oneself in a dimly lit mirror, to beginning to look for God's handiwork in everyone that you meet, from anxiety and objections into truly trusting God is present and in charge. Those are the steps of a faith journey. So a few snippets from my own story. I was born on a Sunday during church. My father was senior warden, and they prayed for me as I was born and then told my father to get himself to the hospital. I've always believed this was somehow important. Prayers for God's presence in my life were there from the very beginning. As a youngster, I sang in the church choir. We were fully enrolled and actually paid 75 cents a week. My recollection, it was not far from payday in the pews to the candy store down in the little town. The choir master was a taskmaster, but I have great memories of giggling in the balcony, being in Christmas pageants, and watching my big sisters take their roles very seriously. It was during this time that the imprinting of the importance of service to others began. Whether it was bringing food and gifts to those in need or sponsoring Fresh Air Fund children from the inner city to come out and spend time in the country with us, I watched and learned from my parents. Service to others was faith in action. My father visited the prisons every month, from age 19 to his death at 87. His prison ministry and church service was his way of sharing his deep faith. My mother taught Head Start in the inner city of Bridgeport, delivered Thanksgiving and Christmas baskets with her 5 daughters in tow, and her church service was defined by her lifelong altar guild ministry and ever-present Bible studies. Mark 10 or Matthew 25 was not talked about. It was just what we learned by example. My parents treated all people with respect and dignity. I can remember going to work with my father in Manhattan and watching him speak to the janitor the very same way he spoke to the executives. Those were powerful lessons indeed. In 1970, we moved to Houston, Texas, thrust into a foreign land filled with Southern Baptists. My parents dove into growing a small Episcopal mission into a healthy and large church. It was in the 70s that the Episcopal Church first began allowing girls to serve as acolytes. I was actually one of the first female acolytes in the Episcopal Church. I love this church. The camaraderie of service was important and fun. Youth group, too, was a big part of my identity. In fact, it gave me the courage to rise in the ranks of the Christian Student Union at school. I was the only non-Baptist member, and certainly the only vice president regularly told I probably would be going to hell for my heretical views. I don't really remember the theology involved in those threats of my demise, but I do remember a growing feistiness in fighting for what I knew was more important. I remember arguing that it says, feed the hungry and serve the poor 801 times in the Bible. It remains on my bucket list to actually do that count. It sounds incredible, doesn't it? But it was and remains a great argument for questioning if you have the emphasis on the right syllable. What you do for those most in need, you do for God. Mark 10, Matthew 25. For 4 years at Vanderbilt, I think I walked through the doors of a church twice. But as a philosophy major, I wrestled with many a professor or peer who challenged the very existence of God. I fought valiantly in support of Kierkegaard and his leap of faith. It was my intellectual moment. Doug and I were married not long after college in the Bethlehem Chapel of the National Cathedral. I still love the metaphor of the sacred cornerstone buried in that intimate chapel deep inside the soaring grandeur of the vast spaces overhead where God lived. It was a momentous beginning as well as a private marker of my deeply held faith. We soon moved to Eastern Maryland and we joined Christ Church and agreed to run the youth group. This clearly was not our calling. God was so present in the births of each of our daughters. We knew we were called for now to being parents. Experience the joy of loving so completely. Experiencing unconditionally that love gives a whole new understanding of how God must love us as his children. We moved up to the big city of Annapolis in 1989, and in the early 90s, I began cooking dinners with my 3 daughters at the White House shelter. While the girls were still young, I committed to taking EFM at St. Anne's. Education for ministry was a pretty rigorous 4-year study of the history and theology of the Episcopal Church. The first 3 years were challenging, with lots of reading and discussion. The 4th year was to be about taking all that we had learned and then finding your own ministry, hearing your call. I dropped out. Reflecting back on that decision, I believe I did not want my call to be formulated in a classroom. I longed for that conversation, but I longed for a conversation between me and God. I was protective of my choice to be a full-time mother and probably did not want to shake up all that I loved doing, chairing events for the girls' schools, serving on the Parents Association, choosing to volunteer where I wanted to. I told myself I was blooming where I was planted, and I liked being in charge. Here's why I love Moses. He was afraid, but not afraid enough to not be in conversation with God. The burning bush was a teeny bit intimidating, but when God commissions Moses to deliver the Israelites out of Egypt, his response is really, whoa there, God. Who am I to take on a Pharaoh? Who am I? God says in return, I will be with you. And Moses says, wait, what am I supposed to tell them? Who has sent me? God responds, tell them I am who I am. which can also be translated as I will be who I will be. My RSV Bible notes that this is the origins of the name for the God of Israel, Yahweh. Yahweh is derived from the word to be. God causes to be. This is the stuff of taking action.